What if I told you that one of the Caribbean's most beautiful islands has been quietly disappearing for 70 years? Not from rising seas or hurricanes, but from something far more calculated, something that's been sold to its people as salvation. Right now, beneath Jamaica's lush mountains and emerald forests, there's a mineral worth more per ton than the island's legendary coffee, its world-famous rum, and its music royalties combined. It's called bauxite, the raw ore that becomes aluminum. And here's what they don't want you to know. Jamaica doesn't just mine bauxite. Bauxite mines Jamaica. In 1953, the first shipload of this red ore left Jamaica's ports. Within 20 years, this tiny island nation was supplying 10% of the world's aluminum. Politicians called it red gold. They promised hospitals, highways, and prosperity for a people finally breaking free from colonial chains. Fast forward to today, and Jamaica's bauxite earnings hit $561 million last year alone. Production is booming at near-record levels. But here's the twist that nobody talks about. The industry now employs only 4 out of every 1,000 Jamaicans. 4 out of 1,000. The wealth is flooding in, but it's not staying. It's flowing through the economy like water through a broken dam, leaving behind only dust, disease, and a landscape so scarred that astronauts can see the damage from space. This is the untold story of how a nation's treasure became its curse. And by the end of this investigation, you'll understand why what happened to Jamaica is a warning for every resource-rich nation on Earth. Before we dig deeper into this shocking truth, if you want to see more investigations like this that expose what mainstream media won't cover, hit that subscribe button right now. We're pushing hard to reach 5,000 subscribers, and your support helps us bring these critical stories to light. Now, let's uncover what's really happening beneath Jamaica's red soil. Let me take you back to a moment that changed everything. August 1953, Port Kaiser in Jamaica. Longshoremen are loading the first commercial shipment of bauxite onto a cargo vessel bound for Louisiana. Among the crowd watching is a young schoolteacher named Marcus Reed, who would later tell his grandson, "We thought we were watching our future sail away to be refined and returned as wealth. We didn't know we were watching our land sail away, never to return." That distinction between what they believed and what actually happened is the key to understanding everything. You see, Jamaica had been surviving on sugar and bananas, crops that left the soil exhausted and the people poor. Bauxite promised something different. It was dense, valuable, and the world was absolutely ravenous for it. Post-war construction was exploding. Jets needed aluminum frames. Cities needed aluminum wiring. Even suburban housewives needed aluminum foil and those new aluminum TV dinner trays. The demand was insatiable. Within 9 years, by 1962, when Jamaica gained independence, bauxite wasn't just an export, it was the export. Between 1950 and 1970, foreign exchange earnings from bauxite exploded tenfold. Government revenues from mining levies paid for the first wave of free secondary education. Suddenly, children who would have spent their lives cutting cane were sitting in classrooms, dreaming of becoming doctors, engineers, lawyers. The formula seemed beautifully simple. Scrape the red topsoil, ship the ore, collect the checks, repeat. An endless conveyor belt to prosperity. By the 1970s, Jamaica had become the world's third-largest bauxite producer, trailing only Australia and Guinea. And here's where the numbers become truly staggering. In 1974, at the industry's peak, bauxite contributed nearly 10% of Jamaica's entire GDP. 8,000 Jamaicans had direct employment, steady wages, health benefits, pensions. The royalties funded health centers in rural areas that had never seen a doctor. They built cricket stadiums that became symbols of national pride. Every ton of ore shipped carried a levy that went straight into nation building. Then came the boldest move in Jamaica's economic history. Prime Minister Michael Manley, a democratic socialist who believed in resource nationalism, introduced a new bauxite levy that doubled the government's take per ton overnight. The Americans were furious. The mining companies threatened to leave, but Manly held firm, and that money funded literacy campaigns that cut adult illiteracy in half within a single decade. For millions of Jamaicans, those expanding mines weren't scars. They were staircases leading out of generational poverty. But here's what the celebration drowned out: a warning that geologists and environmental scientists were desperately trying to voice. Every ton of bauxite extracted required removing an average of 5 meters of topsoil. 5 meters. That's the height of a 2-story house. Entire ecosystems gone before lunch. And the waste generated. For every ton of aluminum produced, you create 2 tons of red mud, a caustic sludge laced with sodium hydroxide, heavy metals, and radioactive thorium. By 1990, the true scale of destruction was becoming impossible to hide. 60,000 acres of land, an area larger than the entire city of Kingston, had been stripped, gouged, and left barren. That's not just empty land. That was once some of Jamaica's most fertile agricultural soil, land that had fed families for generations. And those red mud ponds, they contained over 200 million tons of toxic waste, sitting in unlined ponds, some as vast as airports, leaching poison into aquifers that supplied drinking water to tens of thousands of people. Let me introduce you to Carlton Bongo Matthews. He's a 58-year-old farmer from Kirkvine, a community that sits in the shadow of one of Jamaica's largest alumina refineries. 3 years ago, Carlton planted 2 acres of yams, a crop his family had grown successfully for 4 generations. Within weeks, he noticed something terrifying. A fine red dust was settling on the leaves like rust-colored snow. The vines began to shrivel. The soil, once dark and rich, turned hard and alkaline. His entire crop failed. When he sent soil samples to the University of the West Indies for testing, the results showed aluminum concentrations 14 times higher than agricultural safety standards. Carlton's story is just one thread in a tapestry of suffering. Head east to Stewart Town, and you'll hear from 63-year-old school teacher Pauline Grant. For 2 years, she's been documenting something horrifying. Her students miss an average of 42 school days per year, double the national average, due to respiratory illnesses. Asthma inhalers have become as common in her classroom as pencils. The culprit: airborne particulates, PM10 and PM2.5, silica dust released by nearby mining operations. A 2022 study by the Jamaica Environment Trust found that communities within 5 kilometers of refineries show asthma rates 200% higher than the national average. Go north to Discovery Bay, and you'll meet fisherman Devin Tappa Williams, who remembers when the coastal waters ran clear and teeming with snapper, grouper, and lobster. Today, after decades of refinery discharge, he pulls up nets half empty, the catch smaller, discolored, sometimes covered in strange lesions. Water sampling conducted by the Caribbean Coastal Area Management Foundation detected aluminum levels in some coastal zones 4 times higher than World Health Organization safety guidelines. The reef systems that once exploded with color are now pale and dying, smothered by sediment runoff from inland mining operations. These aren't isolated incidents. These are symptoms of a 70-year extraction that has fundamentally altered Jamaica's environmental health. And here's the truly infuriating part. The companies responsible operate under 99-year land leases first signed during colonial rule, leases that lock in royalty rates that are among the lowest in the entire world relative to the ore's actual value. Let me put that in perspective. Jamaica receives approximately $3 per ton of bauxite exported. Australia, with similar quality ore, charges approximately $6 to $8 per ton. Guinea recently renegotiated to $15 per ton. Jamaica is literally giving away its landscape at discount prices. Why would any government accept this? The answer is both simple and devastating: debt. Jamaica's national debt-to-GDP ratio has hovered between 100% and 150% for decades, one of the highest in the world. Successive governments, regardless of political party, face the same impossible choice: squeeze the mining companies harder and risk them shutting down operations and fleeing to Guinea or Brazil, or accept the suboptimal deal and at least keep some revenue flowing. It's economic hostage-taking, and the companies know it, but the pressure is building from unexpected directions. Enter the Cockpit country, a 300-square-mile wilderness of limestone karst towers, sinkholes, and underground rivers in central Jamaica. This isn't just pretty landscape, it's one of the most biodiverse regions in the Caribbean, home to more endemic species per square kilometer than even the Galapagos Islands. It's also the ancestral home of the Maroons, descendants of enslaved Africans who fought the British to a standstill and won their freedom through sheer will and intimate knowledge of this rugged terrain. And underneath the Cockpit country lies one of the richest remaining seams of bauxite in the Western Hemisphere. In 2017, a Chinese-backed consortium applied for mining permits in the region. The response was immediate and fierce. Maroon leaders, environmental groups, and Rastafarian communities who consider the area sacred formed an unprecedented coalition. They filed lawsuits. They organized protests. They used drones to document the ecological richness and streamed it worldwide. Their argument was surgical in its precision. The 2020 Cockpit Country Protected Area Boundary, supposedly designed to safeguard this unique ecosystem, had been deliberately redrawn to exclude the most valuable mining zones. They called it environmental gerrymandering, a blatant sacrifice of irreplaceable ecology for short-term cash. The government's response: they claimed new technologies, dry stack tailing storage, improved dust suppression systems, and advanced rehabilitation methods could eliminate environmental damage and restore mined-out pits to thriving forest within just 5 years. It sounded promising until independent researchers checked the data. Of all the land mined since the 1950s, less than 20% has been successfully reforested. And that young woodland, it stores only 15 to 25% of the carbon held by the original old-growth forest it replaced. In other words, the environmental debt is permanent. Now let's talk about the economic absurdity that makes this whole situation even more enraging. Last year, Jamaica produced 3.7 million metric tons of bauxite and 1.5 million tons of alumina. The combined value of these exports was approximately $561 million. That's enough money to build Jamaica's entire national highway system. Yet the total workforce for this massive industry is just 4,600 people. That's 0.4% of Jamaica's total employment. 0.4%. Compare that to agriculture. Jamaica's agricultural sector earns slightly less in export revenue, but employs 14% of the workforce. That's 35 times more people for roughly the same foreign exchange. The math is brutal and undeniable. Bauxite pumps dollars but doesn't pump jobs. Even worse, nearly every piece of equipment, every chemical shipment, every high-level engineer is imported. Economists estimate that 60 cents of every dollar earned from bauxite leaks straight back out of Jamaica's economy to pay for imported inputs. They have a term for this: an enclave sector, a massive economic activity that exists within a nation, but remains fundamentally disconnected from it, like a ghost passing through walls. There's also a hidden player in this story that most people don't know about: China. Over the past 15 years, Chinese state-owned enterprises have quietly acquired controlling stakes in several Jamaican refineries. They've brought capital, yes, but also a new set of geopolitical calculations. Jamaica now finds itself caught between its historical ties to the United States and its growing economic dependence on China, which has become Jamaica's largest source of foreign direct investment. The bauxite isn't just feeding global supply chains. It's feeding great power competition, and Jamaica has almost no leverage in that game. Let me share one more story that crystallizes everything. Her name is Amelia Thompson, 74 years old, a grandmother who has lived her entire life in a small farming community called Cockpit in Trelawney Parish. 6 years ago, a mining company approached her with an offer. Sell your 3-acre plot for 2.2 million Jamaican dollars, about 15,000 US dollars. It sounded like a fortune to a woman surviving on a pension of $60 a month. She signed. 3 months later, her land was a crater 30 meters deep. Amelia used the money to buy a smaller plot 5 miles away. Within a year, the blasting from expanding operations cracked her new home's foundation. Her well, which had provided clean water for 50 years, began producing rusty, metallic-tasting liquid. Tests showed aluminum and iron concentrations far above safe limits. She's now paying for bottled water, eating through her settlement money. When I asked her if she regretted selling, she looked at me with exhausted eyes and said, "They were going to take it anyway. At least this way I got something." That sentence, "they were going to take it anyway," reveals the power imbalance at the core of this entire story. The bauxite industry in Jamaica doesn't operate through mutual benefit. It operates through structural inevitability. The companies have the capital, the political connections, the legal frameworks established under colonial rule. The communities have only their land, their health, and increasingly their smartphones. Which brings us to the resistance, because it's growing and it's getting sophisticated. Young activists are using social media to document environmental damage in real time. They're flying drones over red mud ponds and streaming the footage to international environmental watchdogs. They're connecting Jamaican farmers with affected communities in Guinea, Brazil, and India, building a global network of bauxite-impacted peoples. In 2023, a coalition of 15 community groups filed a landmark lawsuit demanding that companies be required to post restoration bonds up front, funds that would be held in escrow to guarantee environmental rehabilitation. The case is still pending, but it represents a fundamental challenge to the industry's operating model. There's also legislative momentum building. A new bauxite levy bill, currently in draft form, proposes raising royalties by 50% and earmarking a third of that revenue for an independent environmental restoration fund, managed not by the mining companies or the government, but by a board that includes community representatives, scientists, and traditional landholders. If passed, it would be the most significant reform of Jamaica's mining sector since the Manley era. But the companies are lobbying hard against it, warning of mine closures and capital flight. It's the same threat they've wielded for 70 years. The question is whether this generation of Jamaicans will finally call their bluff. So what does a fair deal actually look like? Let's do the math together. If Jamaica increased its levy to match Guinea's rate of $15 per ton, that's an additional $44 million annually at current production levels. Over 10 years, that's $440 million, enough to fully restore all mined land using best available technology, enough to provide comprehensive health screening and treatment for every person living within 10 kilometers of a mining operation, enough to establish a sovereign wealth fund that could provide income for generations after the bauxite runs out, which at current extraction rates will happen within 40 to 60 years. But money alone isn't the answer. Jamaica also needs to fundamentally reimagine its relationship with foreign capital. That means shorter lease periods with mandatory renegotiation clauses. It means environmental impact assessments conducted by independent international bodies, not company-hired consultants. It means real-time monitoring of air and water quality, with data publicly accessible to affected communities. It means criminal liability for executives when pollution exceeds legal limits. It means recognizing that economic sovereignty isn't just about GDP numbers. It's about who controls the land, who breathes the air, who drinks the water. Here's the broader truth that extends far beyond Jamaica. The bauxite story is the story of resource extraction everywhere. It's the story of cobalt mining in the Democratic Republic of Congo that powers your smartphone while destroying communities. It's the story of lithium extraction in Chile that enables electric vehicles while draining ancient aquifers. It's the story of rare earth mining in China that makes renewable energy technology possible while creating lakes of toxic sludge. The green energy revolution, the technological progress we celebrate, is built on red mud and broken promises in places most of us will never see. 70 years into Jamaica's bauxite boom, what's the final tally? On one side, roads, schools, a brief moment of national ambition, some wealth for some people. On the other, 60,000 acres of devastated land, toxic ponds that will leak poison for centuries, displaced families, erased cultural sites, a carbon debt that grows with every ton extracted, and a generation of children with compromised lungs and contaminated water. Is that a fair trade? The answer depends entirely on whose Jamaica you stand in. The boardroom Jamaica, where executives discuss quarterly earnings and global supply chains. Or the bush Jamaica, where grandmothers buy bottled water and farmers watch their land turn to dust. The truth that no one wants to say out loud is this: bauxite has never been about making Jamaica prosperous. It's been about keeping the global aluminum industry supplied at the lowest possible cost. Jamaica was never meant to be a partner in this transaction. It was meant to be a mine. And for 70 years, that's exactly what it's been. But here's where you come in. The next time you crack open an aluminum can, or board an airplane, or marvel at a gleaming skyscraper, I want you to think about the red dust settling in someone's lungs 5,000 miles away. Think about the farmer whose yams won't grow. Think about the grandmother buying bottled water with money that should have been saved for her grandchildren. Think about whether the convenience, the progress, the sheer ease of modern life is worth the invisible costs paid by communities you'll never meet. Because that's the real secret behind Jamaica's bauxite boom. The boom was always meant for someone else. The cost was always meant for Jamaica. And until we fundamentally change how we value resources, how we calculate progress, and whose voices matter in these decisions, the mining will continue. Not just in Jamaica, but everywhere. The question isn't whether bauxite mined Jamaica. It clearly did. The question is, what are we going to do about it? Drop a comment below and tell me what you think a truly fair deal would look like, not just for Jamaica, but for every community sitting on top of resources the world wants. I'll be reading every single response. Let's start a conversation that might actually change something.